May 15th. 1940. The morning mist clings to the rolling hills of the Ardennes, and a tense quiet hangs over the French countryside. But this calm is deceiving. On the horizon, German forces, including the elite Grossdeutschland Regiment and the fearsome 10th Panzer Division, are advancing rapidly towards Sedan. Their movement is precise, calculated, and relentless, a testament to the new age of mechanized warfare that will soon redefine the battlefield. French commanders scramble to respond. Orders are delayed, units are scattered, and the defenders struggle to coordinate under immense pressure. Villages like Stone and Flavium become epicenters of chaos, as French troops desperately try to hold their ground while German panzers sweep past with astonishing speed. Every moment matters. Every decision could mean the difference between a successful counterattack and a complete rout. For the soldiers on both sides, the stakes could not be higher. Tanks roar through muddy fields, artillery shells tear through the air, and the ground shakes beneath relentless armored assaults. Amid this maelstrom, small victories and losses ripple across the front, shaping the larger outcome of the battle. The clash at Sedan is more than a fight for territory, it is a test of strategy, courage, and adaptability. Join us as we dive deep into this pivotal day, uncovering the strategies, heroics, and mistakes that defined the Battle of Sedan. Watch closely as the drama unfolds, because every maneuver, every decision, and every bold advance tells a story of its own. If you love history brought to life and want to follow the journey through one of World War's most decisive moments, do not forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss a single episode of our series. Get ready to experience history in action. As the German advance pressed ever southward towards Sedan, the French High Command found themselves engulfed in a storm of confusion and frustration that only deepened with every passing hour. Commanders like Flaviani and Huniger were acutely aware of the gravity of the situation, yet the very machinery of their own forces seemed to conspire against them, turning even the simplest orders into complex, almost impossible undertakings. The morning began with messages racing along telegraph lines and crackling over radios. But delays, miscommunications, and malfunctioning equipment turned what should have been precise coordination into a tangled web of uncertainty. Flaviani received urgent instructions from Huniger to launch a counterattack immediately. Yet the process of assembling his scattered divisions was fraught with obstacles that made the timing nearly impossible to achieve. Units that had been dispersed for defensive purposes the night before were struggling to regroup, with many reporting in late or not at all, and others unable to communicate due to radios rendered useless in the rush to the front. Each passing minute allowed the German forces to solidify their positions, and what might have been a decisive French counterstrike was reduced to a series of fragmented skirmishes that sapped strength rather than building momentum. The battle for Stone, in particular, became emblematic of the difficulties facing the French commanders, as Flaviani's troops attacked and retook the village only to be pushed back by the Germans, before mounting yet another counterattack that briefly regained the position. In the span of just a few hours, the village changed hands multiple times, with each assault leaving both sides exhausted and the French increasingly drained. The problem, however, was not the bravery or the skill of the soldiers on the ground, but the inability of their leaders to bring coherence to their efforts. Flaviani was intent on organizing a full-scale counterattack, yet he found himself drawn into piecemeal engagements that kept his best troops occupied in minor victories, rather than concentrating their power where it could have achieved true impact. Huniger, observing from his command posts, grew increasingly frustrated, attempting to interpret the German strategy while simultaneously trying to manage his own troops' movements across an ever-expanding battlefield. Misreading German intentions, he shifted forces away from fortified positions, unknowingly opening critical gaps in the defenses that allowed enemy units to exploit weaknesses with devastating efficiency. Amid this, the French armored divisions were left to struggle without the clear guidance that might have allowed their formidable tanks to dominate the field. The logistics of moving hundreds of vehicles through bombed-out roads clogged with refugees and disrupted supply lines only compounded the problem, as fuel shortages and delayed arrivals meant that even when units reached their designated positions, they were ill-prepared to mount the coordinated strikes that might have checked the German advance. Meanwhile, German commanders capitalized on every hesitation, every misstep, and every delay, using their speed and superior coordination to seize strategic positions before the French could react. The contrast between the German efficiency and the French disarray could not have been starker, and each miscommunication, each delayed order, and each scattered deployment served to accelerate the collapse of French resistance at Sedan. By mid-afternoon, it became painfully clear that the command failures at the top were as dangerous as the armored thrusts at the front, and the battlefield itself seemed to echo the disorientation and frustration of a command structure that could not match the tempo and precision of its opponent. In this maelstrom of missteps and frantic responses, the French commanders struggled to marshal their scattered forces into a unified counterattack, highlighted the profound importance of communication, timing, and cohesion in modern mechanized warfare. Their efforts, though valiant in intent, were continually undermined by the chaos surrounding them, and as the Germans pressed onward, it became increasingly evident that the failure to coordinate effectively at the command level would determine the fate of the entire front. The clash at Sedan was not merely a test of tanks and infantry. It was a trial of leadership under pressure, where delays, misjudgments, and the inability to unify disparate elements of a force could decisively shape the outcome of history itself. The village of Stone, perched on a slight rise that overlooked the surrounding countryside, became the focal point of a furious struggle that would define the days fighting at Sedan. French forces, determined to halt the German advance, launched repeated assaults to reclaim the village after it had initially fallen to the German Grossdeutschland regiment. Each counterattack brought a surge of hope, as infantry and armored units coordinated to push back the occupiers. Seizing buildings, clearing streets, and raising the tricolor flag once more over key positions. Yet the triumph was always fleeting. German troops, well-drilled and adept at rapid response, would regroup and launch swift counterattacks, driving the French forces back and retaking the village with precision and speed. The ebb and flow of control over Stone became almost dizzying, as hours of relentless combat saw the village change hands multiple times, a testament to the courage and persistence of the soldiers involved, yet also a reflection of the tactical tug-of-war that consumed resources and attention that might have been better deployed elsewhere. Meanwhile, not far from Stone, the French armored divisions prepared to meet the German panzers in open engagement at Flavian. Here, the scale and intensity of mechanized warfare came into sharp focus. The French fielded a significant number of heavy Char B-1 bis tanks, their thick armor and powerful guns making them formidable opponents. Yet the Germans demonstrated a mastery of coordination, communication, and battlefield tactics that allowed them to outmaneuver their numerically superior foes. German tank crews communicated effectively over reliable radios, allowing units to move in concert, support one another, and exploit the vulnerabilities of the French formations. French tanks, though individually impressive, often acted in isolation, their crews unable to synchronize with other units due to broken communication lines and fragmented command structures, which left them vulnerable to ambushes and tactical encirclement. The battlefield at Flavian was a complex choreography of movement and firepower, with French tanks rolling forward through fields scarred by artillery, only to find themselves outflanked or lured into kill zones where German anti-tank guns and lighter panzer units could inflict maximum damage while minimizing risk. Back at Stone, the struggle mirrored the chaos at Flavian in microcosm. French commanders, desperate to hold or regain the village, committed fresh units piecemeal as they became available, continually feeding the fight without establishing a stable front. The repeated assaults created intense localized clashes, with streets and farmyards becoming lethal arenas where infantry, artillery, and tanks collided in short, brutal bursts of combat. Every gain was hard won, and every setback carried the sting of frustration, as momentum slipped through French hands while the Germans maintained the initiative through superior planning and flexibility. The psychological impact of these seesaw battles was profound. Soldiers fought valiantly but began to realize that individual bravery could only achieve so much in the absence of cohesive strategy and coordinated execution. By midday, it became apparent that the French efforts, though commendable for their valor and tenacity, were consuming time and resources that might have been concentrated for a decisive strike. At Flavian, heavy tanks that might have altered the course of the engagement were systematically neutralized by German tactics. At Stone, the repeated back and forth assaults delayed any larger-scale counteroffensive that could have threatened the German bridgehead. The combination of fierce local resistance, tactical ingenuity by the Germans, and systemic French mismanagement created a scenario where courage and numbers alone were insufficient. Both villages, one contested on every street, the other contested across rolling fields and forests, illustrated the brutal reality of modern warfare. That the outcome of battles was determined not only by firepower or numbers, but by the ability to coordinate, communicate, and adapt under pressure. In this way, the twin struggles at Stone and Flavian became emblematic of the broader challenges facing the French army, foreshadowing the cascading failures that would soon unfold across the Ardennes front. As the morning progressed and the village of Stone continued to seesaw between French and German control, the French High Command faced an entirely different but equally devastating challenge. Their own misjudgments and contradictory directives were beginning to unravel the carefully constructed defensive network along the Ardennes. Commander Huniger, interpreting reports through the lens of outdated doctrines and fortified lines, became convinced that the main German thrust was aimed southeast toward Verdun, overlooking the more immediate threat posed by the panzer divisions pressing westward. In his determination to preempt a perceived attack, Huniger ordered a significant realignment of forces, pulling troops away from key fortifications that had been painstakingly prepared to slow any German advance. Among those repositioned were some of the French army's most capable units, including the 3rd North African Division, which had been holding critical sectors southeast of Sedan. Their withdrawal, intended to create a defensive depth in anticipation of the German maneuver, instead left wide swaths of fortifications, pillboxes, bunkers, and artillery positions unmanned and effectively neutralized. Over 130 such defensive positions, once formidable obstacles to any advancing force, now lay abandoned, leaving an open corridor for German armor and infantry to exploit with minimal resistance. The confusion was compounded by conflicting orders cascading through the French chain of command. While some divisions were instructed to fall back to newly designated defensive lines, others were simultaneously directed to prepare for counterattacks, creating a tangled web of operational priorities that no single commander could reconcile. Units already strained by the physical exhaustion of night movements, artillery bombardments, and continuous skirmishes struggled to interpret these shifting commands, often defaulting to inaction or piecemeal responses that did little to impede the German advance. At the front, soldiers encountered abandoned fortifications where defensive preparations had been meticulously established only hours before, encountering gaps where artillery support was lacking. Mines were unmonitored, and infantry positions were empty. The psychological toll on troops was immense. Men who had trained to hold these positions suddenly found themselves ordered to retreat or redeploy without clarity on the broader plan. And in many cases, the sudden absence of neighboring units left them dangerously exposed to encirclement or surprise assault. Meanwhile, the Germans capitalized ruthlessly on these lapses, sending armored spearheads through the vacated lines and seizing key terrain almost without opposition. The widening gaps in the French defenses turned the Ardennes front into a fractured and increasingly penetrable network, allowing German forces not only to advance rapidly but also to dictate the rhythm of combat. The very fortifications that had been intended to serve as anchors for a robust defensive strategy became hollow, symbols of a command struggling under uncertainty and miscommunication. As columns of panzers and mechanized infantry swept through previously contested zones, the disparity between French planning and German execution became painfully clear. Speed, decisiveness, and operational cohesion were turning what might have been a protracted defensive struggle into a swift and dramatic breakthrough. The consequences of these misinterpretations and conflicting orders reverberated far beyond the immediate battlefield. Strategic positions that were once considered linchpins of the Ardennes defense villages, high ground, and fortified sectors now lay open, forcing French commanders further into reactive maneuvers and ad hoc redeployments. Each withdrawal, rather than consolidating strength, propagated confusion and weakened the collective defense, while the Germans maintained momentum and initiative, exploiting the very misjudgments and hesitation of their adversaries. By midday, the fragile cohesion of French forces was visibly crumbling, as communication breakdowns, logistical delays, and command contradictions converged to produce an operational collapse that would make any future counterattack increasingly unlikely. In essence, the French High Command's misreading of German objectives, coupled with conflicting withdrawal orders, transformed prepared defensive positions into open corridors of vulnerability, accelerating the pace of the German advance and setting the stage for the decisive events that would soon engulf Sedan and the broader Ardennes front. As the morning wore on and French defenses began to crumble under the weight of miscommunication and poorly coordinated withdrawals, the German panzer units seized the initiative with ruthless efficiency, transforming confusion into opportunity. The gaps that had opened in the French lines, created by hurried retreats and conflicting orders, became highways for armored columns, allowing German tanks and mechanized infantry to surge deep behind what remained of the front. Units that had only hours before been entrenched in fortifications now found themselves outflanked and surrounded, their positions rendered meaningless by the sudden appearance of enemy armor in their rear. In many cases, French soldiers, still bewildered by the contradictory commands from their own commanders, surrendered en masse to these fast-moving detachments, overwhelmed not merely by superior firepower but by the disorienting speed and coordination of the German advance. The sheer psychological impact of seeing armored divisions appear where they should not have been contributed to the collapse of resistance, as entire companies laid down arms rather than risk annihilation. This deep penetration behind the lines showcased the power of Blitzkrieg, the German doctrine of rapid, concentrated strikes designed to paralyze the enemy through speed, shock, and coordinated combined arms. Panzers spearheaded the advance, supported closely by motorcycles, engineers, and artillery, moving in formations that maximized mobility while minimizing vulnerability. The French, despite possessing individual units of considerable strength, could not bring them to bear effectively. Tanks became isolated, infantry units were bypassed, and supply columns were cut off before they could consolidate or reinforce. In one striking example, a hastily assembled pursuit detachment, composed of elements from panzer battalions, motorcycle troops, engineers, and artillery, swept through retreating French forces, capturing thousands of soldiers with minimal losses and obliterating what little cohesion remained among opposing units. Roadways clogged with retreating columns became death traps, not because of direct engagement but due to the psychological terror induced by the rapid German maneuvering. By midday, the operational landscape had changed entirely. French command structures, already fragmented by contradictory orders, were unable to adapt to the speed at which German units exploited weaknesses. Armored spearheads that had begun as reconnaissance and tactical probes now operated as decisive forces, reshaping the battlefield in real time. Villages, bridges, and crossroads fell to the panzers with alarming rapidity, severing lines of communication and cutting off avenues for organized retreat or reinforcement. The psychological shock alone was staggering. Units that had trained and prepared to fight were suddenly outflanked, encircled, and forced into surrender, often before engaging in significant combat. The Blitzkrieg was not merely a tactical success but a demonstration of operational art, where speed, initiative, and coordination produced results far greater than the mere sum of weapons and men. As German columns pushed relentlessly westward, they left in their wake a trail of captured soldiers, abandoned vehicles, and disorganized units struggling to regroup. The capture of thousands of men, the seizure of critical terrain, and the disruption of French operational plans all underscored the effectiveness of a doctrine that relied on rapid decision-making, flexible command, and the seamless integration of armor, infantry, and artillery. Even where pockets of resistance attempted to regroup, they were swiftly outmaneuvered, often encountering German forces where they least expected them, and forced into capitulation or flight. By the end of the day, the consequences of French disorganization were painfully clear. Panzer units had not only advanced deep into enemy territory, but had also decisively demonstrated the potency of Blitzkrieg, proving that speed, initiative, and coordination could topple even numerically superior and heavily fortified forces, and that hesitation and confusion at the command level could have catastrophic results for the defenders. By the late hours of May 15, 1940, the scale of France's calamity had become undeniable. The once formidable French defenses in the Ardennes, hastily abandoned fortification, and fragmented armored divisions had all fallen victim to a storm of German speed, coordination, and tactical ingenuity. The panzer units, having exploited every lapse and misstep with precision, had pushed deep behind enemy lines, capturing thousands of soldiers and rendering entire corps ineffective before they could regroup. Roads clogged with retreating troops, abandoned tanks, and disrupted supply lines bore witness to the systematic collapse of what had once been considered a resilient front. The battlefield, now dominated by the mechanized fury of the Wehrmacht, illustrated a grim reality. In modern warfare, hesitation and miscommunication could be just as deadly as enemy fire. In the midst of this chaos, the human toll of the unfolding disaster became painfully clear at the highest levels of leadership. French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud, confronted with reports of German breakthroughs and the effective disintegration of defensive lines, picked up the telephone to speak with British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, in a tone heavy with despair yet marked by clarity. Reynaud confessed, "We are beaten. We have lost the battle." These words, simple yet profound, captured the scale of France's defeat and underscored the decisive impact of leadership, planning, and initiative in mechanized warfare. The fall of Sedan and the surrounding sectors was more than a tactical loss. It represented a strategic shock, demonstrating how speed, decisive action, and coordination could overwhelm even a numerically strong and well-equipped opponent when their command and communication structures faltered. As history has shown, the events of that day would leave an enduring lesson for military thinkers and historians alike. The German advance through the Ardennes was not merely a story of tanks and artillery. It was a testament to the power of operational foresight, flexible command, and the psychological impact of rapid maneuver on both troops and commanders. French units, despite courage and skill on the part of individual soldiers, had been systematically outpaced, outmaneuvered, and disoriented by an enemy that understood the value of initiative and cohesion. The speed at which German forces penetrated the Ardennes, bypassed strong points, and seized key positions forced a revaluation of defensive doctrine and illustrated the vulnerability of static, poorly coordinated lines in the face of modern mechanized forces. Thank you for following this episode of our World War I miniseries. If you found this deep dive into the Battle of Sedan engaging, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. By supporting the channel, you help us continue to bring detailed, immersive stories from history to life. Join us next time as we explore the continuing German advance, the desperate maneuvers of the French army, and the extraordinary moments of bravery and strategy that defined this critical phase of the war. The lessons of Sedan remind us that in warfare, as in life, speed, coordination, and decisive leadership can change the outcome of events in a matter of hours.